Today we are going to focus on Founders Spotlight. We have Jack O'Meara from Ochre Biotech, Sam Cooper, a CTO and founder of Phenomic, Laura Brightman, CEO and founder of Co-Laboratories, and Shannon Rainsford, who is also the marketing and media officer for Gap Summit, chairing the session.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much first for joining us and everyone here. Before we start the session, so this is basically a session focused on these founders of different companies. And like you, a lot of them, or just like you, they were at Gap Summit previously. And so we really want to try and focus the session on more of a Q&A style. So if you guys have absolutely any questions, we want to make sure we get to them. But just to start off, is there anything that anyone is interested in learning about how to found a company? Shout it out. Yes.
If you need a lab, how you get the lab?
How you get the lab? Great question. Yeah.
Do you have to start with your own money or?
Start with your own money or not. All right. And last question.
If you want to stay in academia, how do you start a lab without leaving?
These are all fantastic questions, and we hope to get to them at some point. So without further ado, Laura, if you would like to start off with a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I came to the very first Gap Summit. I can't remember which one you guys were in. Very first one, 2014. It's very exciting, and I think they've just gotten better and better. So I then co-founded a company through an organization that doesn't exist anymore, which is very sad, called the Oxbridge Roundtable, I think it was, but it was a long time ago. That's also fit, which is very sad. Then I left that company because it went in a completely different direction. Then I came back to academia for a year, literally studied babies as a bit of a detox. Decided I didn't want to stay in academia. It was great, amazing work. Baby Lab Cambridge, look it up. And yeah, then I decided I missed it. I missed the entrepreneurial spirit, the journey. And so I went back and joined another company I'd worked with before called Geltor. And then when they'd scaled up a bit, I felt I didn't really need to be there anymore. They were turning into a big organization, got Series B, very exciting. They're still growing. And so I was going to come back to the UK, then started with another company that just started up, built their lab space, and then finally I decided, no, I'm coming home now. I'm going to start my own company. So, yeah.
Cool. Hi, Sam. Came to Gap Summit in 2019. Where I met Jack actually there.
The last in-person one.
Exactly. Yeah, last in person since pandemic, and I met a bunch of other good contacts there as well and friends. My journey, so I started at Imperial College for a PhD. Doing a sort of biochemistry, sort of cancer biology stuff there, linked into machine learning. So I was a programmer at heart. I tried doing experiments, it's absolutely shocking. I killed everyone's cells in the lab one day. Promptly banned from the lab and relegated to the little computer in the corner. But since then, yeah, so towards the end of the PhD, interviewed around the place, a bunch of different companies, some quite large and well-funded. Generally sort of felt, there's still an opportunity to build sort of a machine learning company focused on cancer. So started Phenomic back then, more as a software company trying to help sort of other people in the space develop new medicines for cancer. But really realized pretty quick, the only way to build something like properly venture scalable, to get that real exciting investment, that growth trajectory going, was to go find our own drugs. So we sort of transitioned then into sort of drug discovery. So I moved to Toronto actually to get the company going, which is like a wicked place to start a tech software company, terrible place to start a biotech company. So since then we set up Boston sites. We're now based in Toronto and Boston, but then from the UK myself originally. So good to be back, and yeah. Cool.
I'm Jack. I co-founded a company called Ochre Bio. We develop RNA medicines for chronic liver diseases using a lot of genomics to find new targets and then focusing on human-relevant models as opposed to traditional mouse or animal models. We focus on human-based tissues like diseased tissue samples through to whole organs that have been discarded from transplant as an alternative to preclinical testing or interventions. My background, I was originally a biomedical engineer, also killed many cells in the lab, so was quite quickly realized I was not destined to stay in the lab and transitioned into sort of industry relatively early on. I didn't do a PhD. I went from a master's graduate school program into industry and worked across health technology, from digital health to med tech, and ultimately ended up at one of the kind of big biotechs of 2019, 2018 when I was there, was a company called Avexis that brought a gene therapy product, one of the first gene therapies to market. And during that journey, I fell hugely in love with the power of advanced therapeutics to fundamentally change lives in a very, very tangible and transformative way. So after that, I had spent about 6 years in the US, and I was starting to get an American accent. That was making me nervous. I was like, I need to get back, need to get back closer to home. Moved back to London and synced up with a MD, PhD, who was very big on liver. He'd been on liver for 20 years, fundamental research guy, but had a clinical sort of initial training, and we got together on this whole idea of how to rethink liver drug development. And yeah, we're 3 years into it now. It's been a lot of fun. So good to be back, though. It's crazy to be changing seats. I'm kind of a bit freaked out by it. But
You never thought like you'd be on this
yeah,
side.
I know, yeah.
But yeah, so well, I'll apologize for my American accent. But anyway.
No,
It's because the parents. My parents did the same thing. They were just disappointed.
But yeah, so how did you guys come up with the idea for each of your companies? Was it like a problem that you're trying to solve, or did someone else come up to you and was like, hey, let's start this up, or?
Yeah, I can start. So I'll take the lab space question as well at the same time. Basically, lab space is a big problem. That's kind of why you were saying you can't be in Toronto. You have to go to Boston or San Francisco. And honestly, it drove me mad. Several of my friends started companies, including from Cambridge. So I was in a lab in Cambridge originally, and that's where my company co-founded out of. That's why we went to San Francisco, to IndieBio, because there was nothing here. And every year I came back, so when I came back, did my research assistantship position in the baby lab, then I came back again. Each time I tried to come back, there was no lab space. So I couldn't even do a company here if I wanted to. So in the end, I kept asking people and researching it, and everyone said, well, why don't you do it? So by the time I'd built 4 labs, I realized, okay, I'm going to do it. So that's where my company came from, to solve this lab space problem.
Like, emphasizing that, like, because IndieBio doesn't even have Cat2 space, right? It's only like...
They
Does
do.
it now? Oh,
They
we went to IndieBio and they didn't at the time.
Yeah.
And, like, we couldn't even go there. It was like so impossible finding
Which
good lab
batch
space.
was that?
Sorry?
Which batch was
I
that?
have no idea. 2018, 17 maybe.
Oh, was that New York?
Oh, I don't know.
Because I helped build the Cat2 lab space in the first IndieBio space.
Really?
Yeah, it was crazy. So that's how I know about how to build labs and make it work even when dust is falling from the ceiling.
Yep.
It can be done.
Yes, I could. Our journey. So yeah, like there's that meme of like the straight journey, then the squiggly one. We're like top end squiggly. So my PhD was in image analysis for like high content microscopy screening. We started out trying to do like software for companies to help them sort of accelerate like microscopy screens. We then realized we want to go find drugs because there's not enough market for that. So we tried doing sort of high content microscopy for drug discovery in small molecules. That all failed miserably. We then sort of like figured out that it was quite exciting to do that with antibodies or biologics. Again, that was got us excited about our problem. So our problem we're focused on, so I did mention that before, is sort of solid tumours. So realised there's this massive gap and just no one was going after sort of solid tumours. It made no sense. It seemed like this was the big issue that we need to solve, especially like the big cancers like pancreatic, breast, ovarian. So I thought, let's go try and find drugs for these cancers. Tried the screening there, again, had a bunch of issues, but about that time, we kind of got a bit lucky in a way in that sort of single-cell RNA started exploding. So that was maybe very recent as well, maybe 3-4 years ago even. So that's where we then were like, oh, hang on a sec, our software is really good for single-cell RNA. We're focused on sort of the tumor stroma and like sort of, trying to unlock this new area of sort of cancer biology. Like both went hand in hand, and it was incredible to use our sort of software to analyze sort of single-cell and spatial RNA, and then apply that to like, sort of cancer drug discovery and stroma. So finally, maybe 2-3 years in, we started really getting it right, and investors were like, okay, this makes sense, I get it. We had interesting targets and drugs, so that's led to where we are now. Did all that sort of squiggle, but now have quite a nice sort of plan. Trying to solve those solid tumours, get those drugs forwards into patients, and then using AI machine learning sort of to analyse the RNA data to keep building that pipeline out.
Cool. I guess our story was, again, largely due to my partner's long-term background in liver disease, but we looked at chronic liver disease and tried to identify why has there been absolutely no breakthroughs in this field today. There is no treatments for chronic liver disease other than a transplant, and we all know how difficult those are to come by. So we found 3 areas that were really big challenges. The first was the biology. Like a lot of chronic diseases, the biology is still poorly understood. We're still not don't really have targets that seem to work. So to tackle that, we took a big data approach. We built a really rich genomic data set that mapped disease progression over time across 1,000 patients to study what targets might be the most relevant. And then the second challenge we tried to address was Well, we know the animal models don't work because every NASH drug that gets into the clinic worked beautifully in a mouse and then fails horribly when it gets into a human. So how do we rethink the model challenge? And that for us was focusing on human tissues. So as I mentioned, diseased liver biopsies through to actual discarded fatty donor livers as a way to study whether or not our interventions actually would work. And then the last thing, and this is more of a nuanced point, but I think is super, super important for anyone that's getting into drug development in a serious way, is how do you run clinical trials? Not that dissimilar to Alzheimer's or neurodegeneration. The endpoints you're trying to hit in chronic liver disease are just really difficult. Histology is so variable depending on where in the liver you actually biopsy. So you create a lot of noise in your endpoint that you're trying to hit in a clinical trial. So we thought about focused clinical trials and indications where we knew there was a tractable endpoint we could hit. So our first product is in transplant, where there's very well-defined clinical trial strategy. So we knew we could have at least a good swing at it as a first indication and then use that data to incrementally build confidence in our therapeutics as we move into larger indications like fatty liver disease, NASH, and ultimately down the line towards cirrhosis. So we're taking a stepping stone clinical trial approach.
Awesome. Thank you, guys, for sharing all that. And so I just want to give us some time to open up the floor to questions. So we're switching up the panel a little bit. So we're going to ask some questions in the middle as well as at the end. But does anyone have any questions about the journey of going to start and founding a company?
Lots of questions. That's good.
You guys are interesting people.
Hi, my name is Devmini. I just have a question about, starting on your own company. What's it like at the beginning when it comes to money and everything, and your lifestyle?
Yeah.
Because it's a huge
That
sacrifice.
connects to the question from the first question, which was like, what did you start out with your own money or what? Yeah.
Exactly, and also your support system in all of this, because I think it's a very tough journey. And a lot of people say, of course, you're not even getting paid. So do you have another job that supports you? Or a rich partner or something like this?
I wish I could have that one.
So in terms of that, what's it been like?
Yeah, do you want to start?
I'm happy to take a stab. So I think there's an event on later today. I did a program called Entrepreneur First to get it off the ground, and that actually gives you a living stipend. And then if you're successful after 3 months in the program, it gives you a kind of initial bolus of capital to get going. But as we all know, in biotech, things are really, really expensive, especially if you're going to try and be a drug developer. So I guess just to walk through from there what our financing journey looked like. So I had the cheapest rent in London at that point. I think I was paying £220 a month for a flat in London, which is like obscene. Not everyone is in a position to do that. I was fairly comfortable growing up in Ireland, living in squalor. I'm only joking. That's taking a piss. Anyway, I did that for 3 months. Got a bit, again, we were successful in getting EF funding, so that got us sort of allowing us to pay ourselves and taking at least enough to live in a comfortable setting. Moved out of that house. Then we quite quickly realized, though, in order to prove out the hypothesis we had that genomics-led, human-based drug discovery was going to really lead to rich insights for liver disease drug development, we calculated that to run those sort of killer initial experiments to give investors confidence, we need about 250K. So we had about 100K in the bank. So we went then to California to do Y Combinator and applied for that program. And then sort of doubled up on the accelerator cash, got to that 250K mark, gave away 20% of the company, or 17%, potato. And then, but that gave us the cash we then needed to really show prove the hypothesis at a very small scale, but at least in a way that was compelling enough to raise a larger financing. So at that point, after Y Combinator went out and did a seed raise, managed to get 10 million in, which is a huge sort of what the F moment for me, looking at the bank account change. But it was due to kind of calculating what we would need at each step of the way to what investors call value inflection points. So basically de-risking your hypothesis or your product's development along the way. And now we just recently did a Series A, and that was premised on the back, kind of where Sam's at as well, that we've actually done the atlasing, built the models, and now have some lead drug candidates that look interesting in those models. And we're able to use that to raise additional funding. And then ultimately, the next stage will be about taking that into clinical development and then really proving out that this hypothesis is legit and will bear fruit longer term. Hope that helps.
Yes, awesome. And then Sam and Laura, for your companies, did you also go through the accelerator and incubator, or?
No.
Yeah, so we did an accelerator. It's called Creative Destruction Labs. It's based in Toronto at the time. This guy originally set the company up, was with that when it sort of jumped into that when I joined. That gave you no cash. So I was on the finishing up my PhD at the time, so I took a very long time to write up. And I also then lived with my co-founder and his wife, newly married.
I did this
for like 3 months until
really
I got, quietly moved on.
Yeah, don't live.
Don't do that. It's a really bad idea.
Sam, you've been here a long time. There's a nice house down the street you might want to go move into, eh? Yeah, and then like our first cash just came from like some random friend of a connection had like someone who cared about the cause of cancer and stuff. It was like, oh, here's 50K. This will use this to go and find more money. So that was a key inflection point there for us. That very first cash, which meant we could then fly around to the different sort of VCs and then it was actually tough going for the first like 2-3 months, but then someone but we'd been trying to raise in like Toronto and other areas, and then someone was like, oh, you should come down to the Silicon Valley where people take bigger bets on young founders, and they're like, oh, this could probably raise a couple of mil. So I went down there 2 weeks later, had like 2 mil in the bank, and I was like, holy smoke, what happened there? So that's sort of the journey, and then since then, just raising more cash. As we become sort of bigger and more established, other investors are happy to jump in. So where we are now, we're sort of 15, 16 deep, and punting for the Series A these guys raised quite recently. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, very typical. I would say I think there are 3 ways you do it. Either you do it yourself, which is obviously very painful. Currently, I ended up putting a bit of mine in, but then I got an angel, which is what we would call these small investors. It's basically someone who has money, maybe it's a family office, someone who believes in your cause, probably. They'll give you a small check of like 50 to 100K, and that gets you off the ground. It gets you the initial inflection point. Or you get grant money like Innovate UK or an accelerator. Those are the 3 ways.
Actually, there's a difference. So I forgot, we actually did this was courtesy of the guy I started the company with. He had an early check as well from a from a large company that were interested in his research. That's called strategic cash, and that's a slightly different way of doing it. So if your idea is like a bit more established or that company really likes it, then they can often write you a check for a bit of ownership and learning more about the technology too.
And a lot of it's like leverage your network, like ask people for introductions. Like I had no real VC network coming into it, and you can very quickly, you'll find people will help you out, and like, hey, who might be interested in funding this? And I'll shoot so-and-so an email and so-and-so an email. And then you just get on the phone, pitch them. And in the UK in particular, EIS, SEIS, those schemes make it very tax advantageous for early stage angel investors. So you can kind of make the case that you'll get half it back in tax anyway. Give me the freaking money. I'm only joking. Don't use that term. Don't use that.
Depends on the investor. Sometimes that helps.
So all these different ways of getting funding, and thank you guys so much for sharing that too, because I feel like talking about funding and how to even get money to start up a company is something that's kind of taboo to talk about.
We need to talk about
No, you have to be cheeky. Like, honestly, be cheeky. Just do it.
Just get someone really drunk at a bar and give them a term sheet and be like,
That's what.
this is the signature for another beer.
Go to all of the networking drinks. All of the drinks of it.
Funny thing, we'll be going to the dinner later at the Museum of Zoology. Yeah. So, So any next questions?
Can I also just pick up on the point you made about Silicon Valley? So one of the things that I think is probably relevant for a lot of people in this room is the idea of a young entrepreneur in the biotech ecosystem, which is actually, until relatively recently, kind of unheard of, particularly for therapeutics or drug discovery type companies. And that was championed by Silicon Valley because they'd seen it be successful in the tech world. They sort of said, why not take a punt on some of these younger founders in the biotech world? And it is still difficult, I would say, in Europe or otherwise. If you're not sort of in the industry for 20 years, investors are still a bit hesitant. So I guess all that to say, we went to Silicon Valley, had a lot of success. It is... And it's starting to infuse other jurisdictions, but they sort of championed it.
I think the antithesis is probably Switzerland. I just look at it, I imagine that would be a very difficult country for a young person.
Probably, true, yeah.
All right, next question.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Blessing.
Hi.
So I just wanted to ask a few questions. Now, how did you feel when you were looking for fund? Because that kind of anxiety of what if I don't get it? Because I know I'm coming from a different background. Yeah. You had the opportunity, maybe somebody will give you. And I'm coming from the aspect of I don't know anybody. I'm not seeing it coming. How do I go through that process? Then you now think of your competitors. And you are like, what if I succeed in getting the money and I start off and it doesn't work well. You know, those kind of things, how did you go through the process? Even if I get the fund tomorrow, how am I going to go through? Then secondly, would you advise that I just start up on my own or look out for partnership? And then thirdly, I want to ask about, I think those two.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. No, all very important.
I'll go first. So I think, you know, I mean, when I started, I had no idea even what venture capital was. Like, I didn't know it was a concept. I'd done no business things ever. I was just on my PhD, so I had, like, you know, literally no idea what any of this was. You know, the investors were, you know, external. I think it's good, you know, investors, if they invest in some random kid trying to, like, solve cancer, you know, they're not expecting returns quickly. They're not necessarily expecting any of their money back. You know, they know what they're getting in for, right? And so I think it's good. It's very good to get an external investor that you don't know before, or you only know very loosely, who like it provides validation. So they're like, okay, this person at least has some shot on goal. Here's some cash. We'll see what they do. If they lose it, whatever. So yeah, I wouldn't be worried about it. The only thing I would always caution people is very close friends and family will invest in you as a person. Make sure, try and get external validation because that's going to help you all the way through, including there'll be, someone external is more likely to be blunt and like, this is a dumb idea, I'm not going to invest in it, than necessarily someone that really cares about you. So that external helps a lot, but, any way you can get it, is important. If you really believe in it, get it from friends and family too as well. The other thing, and then don't be, never be afraid to fail. Like you've always got backups in life. You're always employable. Like I used to work on a beach as teaching sailing windsurfing. I'd happily do that again in a heartbeat. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that mental health aspect of being worried and anxious if you'll fail, everyone has it. If they tell you they don't, they're lying. Or they're crazy. That's the thing. Like, as in, they could be. Yeah. So there are some people who genuinely have no fears, and they worry me. I would definitely read the book Bad Blood if you haven't. That is about a big failure, right? That was covered up through this sort of overconfidence. You need to have those people to validate you when you're going to fail. But it's about support network. I wouldn't be able to do it without my partner or the people that really believe in me through this. Like you need those. Don't do it alone. Even if you're the only co-founder, you definitely need that support network. So I've been working with Bobby for Alumni, he's amazing. Or Ipshita, who set up the original Gap Summit. She also works with me a lot and she's really great, been very supportive. You need that, definitely.
We definitely echo the mentor's point. That can be really hugely valuable. And maybe to pick up just on the getting resilient and sort of dealing with no's, because you're going to get a lot of no's if you want to go on this journey, and getting comfortable with that is probably an important part of the process. But the other point, a question you asked was personal life and how do you manage that? And it's a hard job. Anyone who wants to start a company needs to expect to really commit a lot of personal energy to it in a way that I don't think any other job, well, not any other job, but a lot of other jobs you won't need to for it to be successful. So you work really long hours, you endure a lot of personal stress, both from getting told no and looking at your bank balance going, oh my God, are we going to crash out of business after all of my hard late nights, etc. And all of the interpersonal dynamics of a really intense environment like a startup is, you will need to build a really strong resilience component to go through it. But again, it's hugely rewarding and impactful if it's successful.
And so to follow up on that and this concept about having co-founders, so how did you guys find your co-founders, and do you think that they have the same skill set as you, or do you think they have a different point of view, and how has that helped build the company?
I can jump in with this one.
Yep.
So I did a EF, so I mentioned that already. So we met through a kind of a medium that you'll hear about later on tonight. It's basically like Love Island for startups. They try and matchmake you with people who you think are cute, whatever. I'm only joking. But what's good about EF and what's intentional about EF, I think what's something that doesn't always happen in a lot of other startups, is that they intentionally bring people with very, very different experiences and skill sets together. Like me and my co-founder could not be more different. he's a very deep South African researcher, big, powerful man, you know him. And I'm sort of, and he's very, very focused on the science. Whereas I'm like, I left the lab after undergrad really, and I went into industry, and all I'm interested in is like finance, operations, how do we catalyze innovation and move it forward. So we've got this and he's 20 years older than me, so we've got different life experiences, and I think that can be really challenging, but it can be really, really impactful and sort of a catalytic combination in ways as well. So finding people who have the opposite of your skill set, but you have to really, really, really like them. You have to have like a really, really strong sense of respect for them, above all else, I think, because you're going to disagree all the time. You're going to have fundamentally opposing views on so many different things, and you have to get to a point where you can agree and move on and not take it personally. Agree, move on, not take it personally. So I think having like a deep like and almost an admiration for the person with self-respect, with respect for them, is like a really important marrying of worlds.
Yes, well, actually, I've got an interesting story. So my co-founder's doing something different now, but I've got sort of acquired a new sort of different co-founder with different sort of skills. So, as I mentioned, the company started software side, and we're doing image analysis for sort of for microscopy data. When we became sort of single-cell RNA for finding drugs for cancer, that was very then out sort of my co-founder's sort of wheelhouse. So he went back to doing sort of more image analysis sort of software stuff. And then I sort of teamed up with the guy in Boston who's like in his late 60s and has done multiple drug discoveries companies before, and was like I like this, let's figure this out, let's work on this. So I don't think it has to be it doesn't need to be the perfect. There's no right answer. Yeah. It's never the perfect. Yeah. It might not be the perfect person to begin with. Honestly, if like the market had worked out and we'd been that sort of software for image analysis company, I would still be with my original co-founder. That became increasingly clear that was a much smaller market than we first thought, and so we just changed and sort of rebuilt the company around that. So yeah, I don't think just find someone that's fun and just get going. Yeah.
No, I agree with all of that. And I guess I would say I don't yet have a co-founder, which is very difficult sometimes. But the reason I don't is because just picking the wrong person is worse, I think. Sticking with the wrong person is worse. So the entire co-founding team of my original company left apart from the CEO because we all just disagreed. And you also have to know when to walk away, I think, to some extent. Yeah. And I feel like you've met him or something. So, if you have really different direction, where you want the company to go, I think the biggest thing is, agreeing on the company vision is so important. Yeah. So even though I don't have a co-founder, I still have partners in the US who are part owners of my company. They were early backers of me. They're really invested in bringing the idea to the UK. And we have check-in calls every 2 weeks. So even though I don't have someone here on the ground with me, I do have that sort of co-founder-like support from someone who understands, and I agree with. We all agree. So, yeah.
So even though it sounds like there's been a lot of trials and tribulations with getting to the point where you guys are now, but I do want to highlight the concept of there are some disappointments, and there seems to be this changeover in people sometimes if you disagree with, well, not necessarily disagree, but don't always see eye to eye. Yeah. So I just want to echo that it's important to know when to call it quits, but also when to push forward. If you guys want to comment on that, otherwise we can take another question. Having
a good agreement at the beginning and the vision for the organization, what the values of the organization you want to live by, all of that sort of framing early on I think has been super valuable for us. Before we even incorporated the company, we wrote out the cultural laws we wanted to live by and aspire to, and the vision of what we were kind of shooting for long term, and having that is really important because there are going to be things that come up along the way, but you can always refer back.
No, definitely. So actually, I recently said no to someone as a co-founder who has amazing experience, looks amazing on paper, but just the way he thinks about things, I just totally disagree with, which is fine. He'll be very successful in what he wants to do, but it's just not the right fit for what I want to do. So, yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
And so how did each of you define your own company cultures? Because I keep on hearing this concept of culture, and it's important to talk about.
I think that is a Bay Area concept in some ways.
All my jobs ever before this, I was like, corporate culture, fuck off. Whatever, But it actually impacts decisions, right? Yeah. So we wrote out these laws. We thought it was kind of quirky. 3 laws: Clark's Law, Murphy's Law, Wheaton's Law. Clark's Law: any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. So what that means is we need to strive for ambitious science. We're not here to do incremental things. We're here to do big things. We're going to go for gold. Murphy's Law, Irishman. What can go wrong will go wrong. We've got to be resilient. not get too worked up over things. Let's just move on, dust it off, and keep going. And lastly, Wheaton's law from The Big Bang Theory: don't be a dick. We're gonna have things are gonna go wrong. You're gonna have, we're gonna have to get on with each other and just be kind and not take things to heart and be kind and treat people the right way. That was the founding premise. But as you go through your journey, you come to these crossroads and you're like, okay, we can take a bet on a transplant innovation, or we can take a bet on this first drug candidate, or we can go this slightly more ambitious one that could have a much bigger impact. And then that shifts. If you've agreed at the beginning, we're going to be an ambitious company, we're not going to do another Me Too, GLP-1, whatever, another target that people know. We're going to go for the more ambitious, the potentially more impactful one. It shapes the decision you make. Same thing if you get to a disagreement with people and it's like, hey, you're going through this sort of conflict resolution. It's like, hey, you were clearly a dick. Like, that's not okay. You're not allowed to do that here. And it gives you a framework to determine like the decisions and the behaviors you want within the organization. So that's like, anyway, I guess from a founder's perspective, there is definitely merit to thinking about these things, because what you put down on paper will shift, and you notice it as you scale. The behaviors of the organization shift depending on sort of what the guide rails are. So yes, it does sound sort of BS-y, but I do definitely think it makes a huge difference, and you should really be intentional and thoughtful about it as you set things up.
Do you guys like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I've now been part of 3 different, well, 4 if you include my latest one, organizations, and all of them have had a different culture. The first one I disagree with, so I left. The second one, Geltor, amazing, doing really well. They have a very intentional company culture, and actually I still really agree with the 2 founders who I love. They have such a complementary skill set too, and wanted that to carry on in the organization. So they deliberately put down some values similarly, and they stick by it, and that's really important. So their culture is still great. Then the next company was again called Karma Biotech, literally named because they were shot in the back previously. So they said, we are not going to do it, and they intentionally made the name so that if you cross out some of the letters, it spells karma bitches. So just to give you an idea, it really matters, the culture that you set out. And so they actually, both organizations have fired some people who didn't fit with that culture, and it was necessary, and those people were actually prohibitive to progress, even though they were great scientists, for example, and that also is very important.
Yeah. So for us, a slightly different tack there. So actually one of the biggest challenges we've had recently, so we've got 2 sites. We've got one in Toronto and one in Boston. It's nice to get to that sort of level. But it's been really hard trying to get those 2 sites to gel, especially because we had them both running in like pandemic when no one could travel. We couldn't have anyone traveling either. So for us, it's honestly been really challenging. I think what we found is that a lot of companies, when you're not in science, they do 1,000,001 sort of icebreakers, or like one of these team dynamics, team building activities, or virtual ones, which we tried that. It was god awful. Like no one ever wants to do another team building activity on Zoom again. What we found though is that we gelled most about, I think, the science and stuff. So like what got us excited was just chatting about science, doing like journal clubs type stuff, digging into new science. Everyone loves what they're doing. We shouldn't have an issue with culture because we're solving cool problems that are meaningful, and everyone's doing cool stuff every day. So we've found it, the best thing to get is just really good, deep conversations about science, new stuff, how we could bring in like new technologies to the company and stuff, and just really emphasizing that science has been, I think, the best for getting everyone sort of bonded and working together. Yeah.
Thank you. We can take another question.
Hi, so I guess I have 2 questions. One is, first, how do you make sure you surround yourself really well at the beginning when you're building your company, not just with a co-founder, but the first people you bring in? And the second is, how do you feel about shares, giving up shares to create incentive?
I'll just keep it. So I want to double answer here as well. And you had an earlier question about what to do if you don't want to be in the company to start with. I think that was the second. If you want to stay as an academic, was the second question that hasn't been answered. So I'd say there's a couple of different models. Now, the one we've been talking about, we've gone through, is very much like the we're going to do it ourselves model. And so that is very much, I think it's a bit opportunity. Jack went through EF. I just found my co-founder through a conference, went solo. That's very hodgepodge of everything. There's other models which are a bit more defined. So we have the model where you start with lots of equity and you narrowly get chiseled away. And I would never, don't worry about equity, just try and de-risk, bring in cash and just go, ignore that. It's not, if someone, think about it a bit, but it's the least of your problems. All of your problems are going to be science risk, and do you have enough cash? Not how much do you own. It's pretty binary. There's different models where you give up a lot more equity a lot faster, and these. So this not really in tech world, but in biotech world, you've got like people that probably the minority almost of venture capital groups that back individual founders. Arguably, the majority will take academic technology and they themselves build the company around it. And these are sort of your classic Boston venture builders. There, the academic is sort of more hands-off. The VC can own anything from 50 to 80% of that company as it's built, with the 20% reserved for sort of scientific or academic founders. And they then sort of do that pairing up between you. And then so if you want to start a company, but you're not really sure what you're doing, or you're not sure about your tech as well, don't knock chatting to one of these venture builders, or even joining them as an employee with some early ideas and working with those guys to think about technologies. And if you're academic and you want to stay as an academic, go chat to those guys, pitch your idea, pitch the science, and see if they want to work with you to build something around that as well. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we, on the share question, take a very, because we're sort of Silicon Valley-esque funded at least, we're very pro-equity for everyone that joins the company. We're all on the same ship, building it as we fly it, sail it, whatever ships do. So we're very pro giving away equity to support ownership in the business. And I've forgotten your first question, but that was...
Building the team around.
Oh yeah, first hires. Okay, that's actually a really important one. Yeah. So like something you do need to be super intentional about your first hires, because they ultimately define the company, and you can kind of notice it as you grow. People tend to hire people like them. So each individual you hire early on that scales the company sort of builds a mini themselves empire. That's very much overstating the reality, but it kind of is. And it's really important that you get people that are just at the beginning quite generalist, but have the right attitude. It's like if you bring in someone with a negative that brings a little bit of negativity, even just minorly, it can have such a damaging downstream effect on the environment, especially when you're so young. And everyone knows, we don't really know where this is going to go. We're all sort of figuring it out. As soon as there's something like, this is the wrong, this is really bad, it's really negative, it just becomes like a poison in the organization very early on. So above skill, I think hire for ambition, whatever your values of the organization are, like the right people are going to bring the positive attitude, are going to figure it out as they go, not going to be too, I'm not articulating myself very well. But I think, I guess all that to say, like thinking very carefully about the environment that's the person you're hiring is going to create around them is super important in the early days, when so much of it is about we all are on this mission together. It may go down tomorrow, but we're going to figure out a way to make it work. You need really good people for those stages.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. I would say actually the people who want to come in early and believe in the vision will want equity, firstly, because they want to be part of something long term. Most equity is vesting, so it means that you often don't get it unless you stay at least a year, for example. So that means they have an incentive to stick around. And so, for instance, I've been asked, I want this as my salary, and I want equity too. So normally early on, you get one or the other. You absolutely cannot have both. It's not fair as a company, but often founders will take more equity and less money early on as well. So that's another way to think about it.
To provide some ballpark numbers for anyone actually interested in building companies, so just like, because you never get this sort of black box open for you. So early investment rounds expect to give if you're founder led, 20 to 40% away. That initial sort of incubator as well. If you're, again, venture builder side, expect 60 to 80% will go to the investor. First co-founding employees, is some fraction of the company. First employees that aren't founding members and aren't taking the market level salary, you're then I'd say single digit percentage, 1 to 3%. This is obviously important to anyone looking to join a company. Yeah. Beyond the first 10 hires, you're usually then below 1%, except key hires like either new CEO, C-suite people. You then also have advisors that will typically take between, if they're a super science name in science for a Nobel Prize, maybe 1 to 2%. Less than that, if they're not founding academic, then you're sub 1% again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Someone actually recently, who might be here, offered to work for me for free, and I said, no, do not work for free, even if you just get a bit of equity. Yeah. If you value your work, you shouldn't work for free as well.
All right, next questions?
Hi, my name's Daniel. I'm an MD PhD student in the United States, and I just had a quick question for you all about timing. I mean, those numbers all make sense and everything, but would you be able to get like venture funding before you have co-founders or before you have like a small team built, or are they going to want to see that infrastructure built before they're going to give you the money?
Chicken and egg.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it depends. Like angel funding is easier to get when it's just an idea, or some venture builders will help you build your team anyway. I would say if you have people in mind, that's better. Sometimes they will, if you say, I will hire this person as soon as I get funding, or this person is contracted to start as soon as I get funding, that can also be a good point if they can't give up their full-time job or something.
I would suggest probably trying everything sort of at once and seeing what starts working.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, it really depends, I think, on the business, the sort of strength of the scientific innovation, and otherwise, if you've got some really breakthrough thing, maybe you can do it alone, but typically, speaking investors will want to see you de-risk it, and that may mean bringing on team members or otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, if no one else will join you, that's a risky idea.
Yeah.
It's a fair and valid point.
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Hi, if you can think of, before your entrepreneurial times, if you can think of one experience which was most valuable to you now or during your early entrepreneurial success, what would that be for each of you?
I can nail that straight on the head. It's an interesting one. So no names mentioned. I was, dating a girl for long, I was dating a girl for a while, and her dad was like incredibly successful entrepreneur. And I remember sitting down at dinner, and like the guy was super nice, super smart, incredibly successful. But I realised he was just like a normal, like one of any other person, good to chat to, like down to earth, incredibly smart, but not like, oh my god, I could never do this ever. And I was like, all right, maybe I have a shot at this. Maybe there's some way if we get a bit lucky and the stuff like that happens, and maybe I can do it. And I was like, oh, right, yeah. So here we are. So thanks to him, yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a really good point around people normalizing it. Because when I started off, similarly, it was like, how does anyone start a business? And then you start talking to people who've done it, and you're like, they're not that much smarter than me, are they? Or something. They don't look. Not. And then you're like, wait a minute, I can do it. Actually, I think David Booth, who's in the back here, is one of the first people I talked about entrepreneurship, and he was starting a company. I was like, how do you do this? And find mentors, and people that can give you sort of clues to how it works. And then all of a sudden, what happens if it looks like it's working is you start to just snowball, and then everything, the fundamentals don't change around interpersonal dynamics and communication and networking and pitching and all, but the scale just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And,
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that as well. I would say for me, it was like going to conferences. I always volunteered to help out at the Cambridge Neuroscience Symposiums, so every year, and then I ended up helping so much, I would literally help the person organizing the conference for weeks before. I would end up talking to all the speakers, including people who were entrepreneurs, and this was, well before I started. So.
I organise a conference as well, actually. It's interesting. Yeah, maybe that's
it helps,
thing.
I
They
think.
organise a conference.
Or attending something like this, right? Similar.
Yeah, this type of stuff. I used to organize a bunch of events in college as well. Like
say,
that whole that is actually a big part of the job too.
We're always looking for alumni and ambassadors to
Yeah.
help us out. So here's a plug for Gap Summit and GBR.
They actually say one of the most correlative elements of people who start successful companies is when they're early on, they just have little ideas that the lemonade stand or the or the conference organizer, or those types of experiences sort of help you build that confidence. I think a lot of it's confidence to go out and sort of take a bet on yourself. Yeah.
And I totally want to echo this concept about humanizing people, which sounds really ironic, but we had a bunch of wonderful speakers today, and at the end of the day, we're all just people, and I feel like that's a phrase that's often said but not felt, but just really want to echo that. All right, next question.
Hi, I'm Hyen. I just finished my bioscience enterprise degree from the University of Auckland, and I was just wondering, how important do you feel it is to be an employee before becoming, an employer or working for yourself first?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Have you guys been employees of Alumni?
Yeah.
Yeah, that. I guess you had all the bad bits. I'll go quickly. So I co-founded a company first, but I was a research assistant before that. So I worked in a lab for 2 years, which actually related to my first company, which was using neural stem cells, for example. I was going to do a PhD, tried out lots of PhD applications, got to the last few of several, and then realized it wasn't as good fit, which is why I then co-founded a company. But I wish I'd worked for other startups first in some ways, because I would have learned a lot of the warning signs that I should have left earlier maybe, or what was difficult and things like that. So having now worked for 2 other biotechs, I feel way more confident in my ability to lead one.
So I turned down a pretty early job at a now quite successful startup. So if this company's successful, I'll be telling you that I should have stayed, I should have never worked for someone else. This is the best thing ever. Yeah. If we fail, I'll be like, damn, why didn't I work for those guys? But whatever.
Yeah, I think it's like one of those things that you can do it without starting a company. You can be very successful. There's some great examples like Sam, Trevor at Mammoth Bio. There's a bunch of people who came straight out of PhD and done an amazing job because you have to grow into a corporate executive essentially during the process of funding and kind of starting an idea. But it does help to have seen it before. Like having worked in an environment that gives you some of the clues and you sort of see what leadership looks like in a large organization, that sort of training can help you sort of evolve as well. So I think either way works, but I think you can de-risk yourself by having worked in other environment.
Yeah. Statistically, the odds are against you coming straight out your PhD. You're much more statistically likely to succeed and do well if you're coming in after other jobs and later on in your career.
Absolutely.
But I think it depends on your network though. So if you have all that support behind you, so if you have a great co-founder and other thing, that can de-risk it as well. Sure. So if you have someone who is more experienced, that can help. Yeah.
And mentors are like supercharged. It's like I don't need to. It's like a crazy steroid to develop. Like get like really good mentors and build like really close relationships with them because that will just massively accelerate your development.
So how do you find your own mentors?
Conferences. Or networking events. Yeah.
Pubs. Yeah.
Pubs. Yeah. Find a mentor who you can go for a drink with, whether it's a tea and coffee or a proper drink.
Yeah. And if you don't like drinking, don't go to pub to find a mentor. No, I don't know. Do what you want. Everyone's different in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, you do need it, because I think the most valuable ones are the ones where you actually build a personal relationship with and really kind of trust each other, and they're willing to then open up some of their deeper feelings around the whole journey. But it's the job of an entrepreneur is essentially pitching all the time. You're pitching investors, pitching new employees, and pitching for mentors. Give them your story, tell them your idea, give them your life story and why you feel like you really want this to work, and you'll find people are incredibly generous in this sector, in the life sciences and healthcare sector, because we come into it early on as people who want to do something good in the world. So you will find there's a lot of generosity. And you can kind of get into that if you're...
But don't pick the person who just says, yes, that's a great idea. Pick the person who's like, dumb, that's dumb, do that.
That is the best thing that's been said all day. So many people will be like, and if people who actually trust you and care for you will tell you you're stupid a lot. And that is really important to hear, especially early on.
Or especially if you have a freak out. I had a bit of a freak out the other week, and then I told my partners in the US, and they were like, calm down. Nothing has changed. I was like, okay, that's true. Nothing has changed. So, you need someone who will just calm you down, give you a reality check, like you said.
Yeah. It seems like you all value open and honesty with your partnerships with everyone, which I think is incredibly good to have. I think we have time for one more question. So who's going to be the lucky LOT?
Oh, no, I'm actually really sorry it's come to me because I'm going to ask quite a depressing question. But you mentioned karma, and I've got like a couple of kind of horror stories of friends who have founded startups and it's all gone pear-shaped because of a co-founder they've been with who's like stabbed them in the back. How do you talk about like hiring well, which I think is such wise advice. I like don't be a dick as being a key rule. How do you like protect against that? Do you guys, are you lawyers? Do you get lawyers?
That's a great question. It's really important to just practically co-founding document. You have a set of documents of incorporation. They offer people shares. Make sure everyone's on the same system, vesting schedule, scare schedule, stuff like that. Yeah. So it's not like someone owns all the shares and this person has to work for 4 years to get that. Everyone's like, you should have everyone. All co-founders should be vesting over 2-4 years or whatever you want to call it. I would suggest 4-year vesting schedule. And so if someone, if there's 4 of you and someone's really bad and they leave, it says you only get a quarter of what we get if we stay for 4 years. So there's legal safeguards. There's like they're defined by different. Like Y Combinator have this on some page you can read about. Read those, pay attention to them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the reason Karma was formed was because originally the company some of the people worked for, it happened that there was a dispute about like vesting in equity. So one of them was working full time and the other two were academic and didn't stay. Basically, they weren't doing anything, but they expected to keep equal equity. And that was a big problem because investors also wouldn't invest because they were like, well, these people don't have a vested interest in doing well for the company. They have a nice salary. Why should they have equal equity? And they just see the direction of the company going badly. So investors can also tell. So that's why it's so important to get the equity right, I think.
Yeah, and I say do your reference calls. Like same way you would with a hire. Like ask around, what's this person like to work with? Is there anything I should be aware of, and so on and so forth? Because you can get pretty good character calls on people, and then you are going to disagree. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Like that is a part of the job. Like you're going to have philosophical things that you really take seriously and will go to war together. So you need to have a rules of engagement for how you have disputes because it's a natural part of an entrepreneurial journey. And that's why a lot of people fall out, I think, because they don't disagree well and they take it personally or otherwise. Like find a framework for how you have arguments that's constructive, and when you get to a point of agreement, you're like, done. I'm on board. Let's go. What's the plan? You know, you got to get to a point of like, we're in this together. We said same value statement. We share long-term vision. Like if we're going to disagree, we're going to disagree. But we're going to get on with it and not the water off a duck's back. I think those are also important things.
And the other thing as well, like like a good safety net is that like, if it's just like a few of you as co-founders, if you're around for like a year or two, like, you will get in this, it can go wrong, you might hear horror stories. As the company develops, you get like a board of investors that, with real control. And if there's 3 co-founders and one's being a knob, that board can push them out. They have the authority to do that, they have all the controls in place. And they'll be like, okay, you two are sticking around, this person's gone, and there's those safety nets. And the bigger the company gets, the more of that exists. And so, there's a couple of horror stories, like we've all seen sort of the mentalness of WeWork and some of those late stage stuff, but they get smaller and smaller the later stage the company gets.
Yeah. Again, read Bad Blood.
Yeah.
So what not to do? And similar things have happened in some of the companies I've seen. Like IndieBio is like a crash course. It's 3 or 4 months of intense, like co-founders. Basically, we work 8 till 9 p.m. every day. We all have dinner together every day. So some of those teams did fall apart or got changed. And I think that intensity helps it make or break in some ways, which is why doing it earlier is much better. And now afterwards, several of those companies are extremely successful now, having had those changes.
All right, and just in the interest of time, that is it for the Founders Panel. I want to thank you guys so much for thank you all for being open and honest. Please just wait one more moment. Laura, you have something to plug before we leave?
So I'll put it on the app as well, but we have an event later in September hosted in conjunction with Alumni Accelerator. It's on the 23rd of September called Leveraging the Biotech Ecosystem. Anyone who's around still in the UK, sorry for those who aren't, please come along, meet some young companies, see if that interests you. Talk to venture builders who are going to be there. Illumina Accelerator will be there. Nucleate will be there. It should be a good event.
All right, cheers. Thank you, guys.
Woo!